for that infrastructure, also the critical infrastructure that supports Guam defense system, which is also so very critical.
I thank you for that. And we experienced in this last storm, the utilities and bringing them back up, and those winds weren't as bad, but the storm just stayed for 3 days, and the high surf and all made a big difference. So working with Department of War, helping with our finance to complete the power requirements that we need will be excellent. I thank you for your support on that. In addition, let's talk about our civilian employees that are Department of Defense employees. Their living quarter allowance. As we know, we have high expenses on Guam, and the employees hired off island do have LQA. The employees hired from Guam do not, and end up going to the mainland to get that additional funding. So we did include the LQA in the recent NDAA. I'm just wondering when would this be implemented?
I'll have to get back with you on when it's implemented, but I do want to express my support for it. Guam is one of those locations where cost of living, including cost of housing, is so expensive. We're trying to relieve some of that cost of housing with our own construction of on-base housing facilities to take the pressure off. But for our civilian employees, ensuring that their compensation meets their living expenses so we can continue to attract and sustain the best civilian workforce is essential, and I'll work with you on that, and I'll get back to you on the time frame.
I thank you, sir. And lastly, you mentioned our medical facilities. We just don't have enough. If conflict does happen, we don't have enough at all. And if conflict doesn't happen, with all the troops coming on in, our pediatric ward is not capable, right? We're hoping people will have a good time and wanting to start their families on Guam. That would be terrific. So we need that support, especially with our hospitals. Our Navy hospital is way too small. It wasn't meant to be built for that. And our civilians hospitals don't have the capacity. So if you can ensure that we can, with GPA, also our hospital gets assistance, please.
That I will, sir, and Governor Liu, my dear friend, and I are in lockstep on the civilian hospital in Guam, as well as to continue the personnel enhancements to Naval Hospital Guam. And I'll also add the enhancements that we've made for medical at Camp Blaz as well. But all of it's critical for our defense. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize Jim from Colorado. Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Congressman Tran.
Thank you so much to my friend and colleague, Representative Crow, for yielding. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. Next Thursday, April 30th, marks the 51st anniversary of Black April and the fall of Saigon. As the son of Vietnamese refugees, I know how imperative it is to recognize this solemn day. That history is a prime example of why this committee and this Congress should be focused on the Indo-Pacific. I also represent Joint Forces Training Base in Los Alamitos, a mission-critical base for the Pacific. So I think it's fair to say that my community and I understand better than most that deterring the Chinese Communist Party's aggression, expansion, and influence has to be the #1 priority of the Department of Defense, which is why it is also concerning that there are reports stating that resources from the Indo-Pacific are being transferred to the Middle East to support the administration's war of choice in Iran, a war that's claimed the lives of 13 service members. General Brunson, is it true that resources from the U.S. Forces Korea have been redirected to the Middle East?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I would prefer to answer that question in close.
I appreciate that, and I will follow up in a closed session. In the event with our resources being sent to the Middle East, Admiral Paparo, how has the movement of resources put our soldiers and interests in the Indo-Pacific at risk?
Along with my good friend General Brunson, I'd like to talk about that in closed session. We do have forces that are operating in the Middle East. And we do expect the return of those resources. We've taken entrepreneurial approaches to maintain our program of exercises. We do maintain a combat-ready reserve. The military is always in the action of controlling for risk, and we can get deeper into the individual movements when we are in closed session. But I'll also say that those forces in the Indo-Pacific are experiencing combat, and there's no substitute for combat, and there will be direct applicability to the Indo-Pacific.
I appreciate that, Admiral. And, our military has been asked to do a lot this year with multiple conflicts and operations across the world. If this keeps up for too long, such a high demand could actually undermine our military readiness rather than improve it. We're already seeing the USS Ford on track to break the longest deployment for an aircraft carrier since the Vietnam War. Admiral Paparo, from your perspective, are we approaching a point where the demand on our troop is degrading our readiness?
Congressman, there are finite limits to the employment of the gear where it's got to go back for maintenance availabilities. I've not yet seen where depot-level maintenance has been affected for our aircraft or ship availability has been affected for our ships. I've not seen that, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. It is something that we keep an eye on, and then, I've got a strong dialogue with the department on ensuring that the department is aware of what the risks are. At this time, there's not been a degradation of readiness at this time.
Appreciate that. And General Brunson, what are your thoughts on the forces within the Korean Peninsula?
Congressman, thank you for the question, and this I can't answer right now. And I would tell you that what we have in the model ally in Korea is simply this. About 20% of the cost of stationing forces forward is borne by the Koreans. And that through the Special Measures Agreement, which takes into account about $500 million in terms of what would be MILCON that the Department of War would have to bear, which they don't have to bear because that's paid for by the Korean, the ROK-funded construction. We also get about an 85% blessing in terms of salaries, which for our KGS wage employees that support our command in theater. That's borne by the Koreans. So 85% of the salaries paid by the Republic of Korea, we only bear the cost of 15%. And so the Special Measures Agreement lowers the cost to include logistics sharing, which supports and sustains our commands across, from construction materials to energy and the like. So the forces that are stationed are well positioned at less cost than others who are placed forward to OCONUS.
I thank you three very much for